purpose of this research is to come up with a set of guidelines that architects can use when designing a project in a particular location in order to customize this project to that location. Our research zooms in on a case study of a low-income village in a remote desert area in Egypt, and we came up with a set of guidelines for this particular village in order to portray how architects can make their designs customized to our particular area. This research is important for architects because nowadays you find that architects design buildings that don't have any appreciation for their surrounding context, the people, their needs, the needs of the community, and the climate needs. First, we're going to talk to you about the context that we selected and give you an appreciation of the context, and then we will tell you the design guidelines that we came up with for this particular context. Design guidelines meaning if we're going to design a project in this area, any architectural project, what should we do such that this project respects the context and is specifically customized for this context, such that people say, oh yes, this building belongs in Khartoum village. And then we will show you how these design guidelines have been implemented for testing. So we chose a village in a province in Egypt called South Tahrir. South Tahrir is located about 150 kilometers outside of Cairo. It is originally was desert land, but then it became reclaimed through government schemes. South Tahrir is a good site. We chose it because there's a lot of water available in the area. The soil is cultivated. It has good connectivity to other cities in Cairo, and hence is accessible. Here is a Google Earth map zoom in of the province, the red dot being the selected site. Khartoum village, which was the red dot. We chose Khartoum village because it has good access to public services, some job opportunities we'll talk about further. Here's the village that we chose. Now we chose this village, and we're going to talk to you more about the village so you can get an appreciation of its character, such that, for example, if an architect wants to design a building in this village, for this village, they use the guidelines that we propose, and this will make their project hopefully customized, respecting the needs of the villagers and their architecture. As you can see, across the street from the village is an AUC farm. This is very important because many of the villagers who live in Khartoum work on the AUC farm. The men work as farmers, the women work as cafeteria waitresses and housekeepers, for example. So without if there was no AUC farm, there would be no village. It has a small population. It's compact. It's a very compact village, very warm. People very close to one another. The good advantage is it's very developable. There are a lot of vacant plots around it, so there's opportunity for expansion. These are some 3D images of the village. As you can see, the villagers built all of the houses for themselves using limestone brick because that's the most abundant material in the area. As you can see, the buildings are in very poor condition because they're not expert architects, for example, or engineers. They just built it themselves. There's very poor daylighting, poor air circulation in their houses. Nevertheless, they do use colors and such for identity purposes. The vacant plots are completely desert land. This is the AUC farm, which is the main source of income. These are dorms and lecture halls in the farm, which are across the street in the village, and this was designed by a professional architect, which is pretty apparent. The AUC farm is a research center. Actually, it tests the potential of desert development. They've grown forests in the area, greenhouses, livestock cultivation, drip irrigation testing, and all of this comprises part of the village's identity. That all of these things are taking place there. So they live in a very rural area, although they are out in the in a very remote desert area. It's still a very rural environment. There's been some attempts at renewable energy, powering a house using solar energy, for example. So in order to appreciate the context, to come up with a set of design guidelines for them, we described the user group, we studied them, we saw that most of them are farmers, living very simple lifestyles, low income, basic education, maths, English, computer, for example. And they have public services. Although they're much better off than other poor people in Egypt, but they do still have problems. The most pressing problems being environmental one. They have a waste management problem, agricultural water demand management problem, some pollution, air and water pollution, for example, energy problems. But on the architectural level, not on the environmental level, on the architectural level, their buildings do not make good use of the resources that are available. Again, poor daylighting, poor ventilation. Also, their buildings, although many might agree with me and might disagree with me on this, they do not reflect their traditions, because there are some activities they would like to do, but they are hindered from doing it because they were not able to design their buildings for these activities, because they're not professional engineers, for example. So the solution to this is to come up with a certain type of design, architectural design, that would give them their character and make best use of the climate, which would come up with one new type of architecture for them that people can say, this is South Tahrir. Like, I look at this building and I say, this is South Tahrir. And this will attract people to come to the village, which is good for their economy. The idea is to come up with, and emerge through their architecture to come up with this new tradition of self-reliance, collaboration, productivity, like a cradle lifestyle. In order to develop the area, we studied the development growth in this area is usually radial. A lot of nuclei sprouting out from around the village, which is the red dot. Here is the village once again, showing you the empty plots that are available. We analyze the village on 3 different scales: an urban scale, architectural scale, and a human scale. Now, all these scales are very important because in order to come up with design guidelines, you have to have an appreciation for the concept of all scales. And so at the urban level, we found that some of the problems are that they have their land uses are mainly residential. A lot of variety, very low activity levels, which is not very safe in a desert area. We need to up the activity levels. Circulation is mixed, vehicular and pedestrian, which needs to be separated in any architecture that gets proposed in this area. Some of the opportunities, though, is that they have some wide open spaces and some nice, warm, narrow corridors at the same time. They also have good connectivity to their public services through main roads. At the architectural level, they have nice, a good way of each person identifying their house and giving themselves their own character through colors and pillars and such. But as you can see, if you look at their plan, their architectural plan, they have very few, and it's not very well designed. Like, the animals are mixed in the house, and there's hygiene problems, and this gives birth to disease on the long run. And so this is one thing that needs to be changed. Also, some of the houses have no windows. They didn't put any windows because they have a security problem, so they only put skylights, which allows dust to enter and no for hot air. And so these are some of the opportunities in the at the social level. So they have positive traditions and negative traditions. Some of their positive traditions are that their most positive tradition is that there's a lot of all the community participates in social events. They're all very close to one another. It's not like neighbors are like family. Everyone is very close. And the negative traditions are that they're not very productive group of people, although it's a small population. The children don't have a lot of practical training. There's no awareness to save water and energy. So these are all things that we need to address in our architecture when we come to design a project in this area. So we came up with a set of guidelines specifically for this area. So if an architect wants to design a building or project in South Tahrir, if he follows 1, 2, 3, 4 urban envelope character and climatic design strategies, he will come up with an architecture that respects the people of this context, respects the villagers, their needs, addresses their problems, their positive traditions, their negative traditions, everything. It will be specifically for South Tahrir. So we're going to go through them. First one being the urban grid. You notice that there's a very strong grid in this area. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but the villagers built this village for themselves. So it was a strong grid, and we suggest that any architect that plans on doing a project in the area carries this grid forward to respect the urban grid. They also have nice gateways that should be, and the best proposal is for them to come out of the main road for accessibility. Some expansion techniques. If you want to customize your project to their climate, then you should ensure that they all have access to the sun and adequate daylight using the solar and daylight envelope strategy, and combine them together to come up with a hybrid envelope, which is something a lot of environmental designers have done. As you can see, the envelope would be customized to their climatic needs, to the climatic needs of that particular location, through entering the latitude and making a simulation of this on the computer, and then you fit your building into this envelope. As you can see, some architects, like big architects for example, have already done this before. It's been very successful approach, and a very good way of customizing your building climatically to the area. Character-wise, we can see in the village they have like a lot of Islamic and floral motif, a lot of desire to be close to nature. Everyone has green next to their buildings because they're in the desert. And so we think that if you are going to design a building in this area, it should have some spirituality to it and some connection to nature, integrating in the buildings. We came up with a list of strategies, like water-saving strategies that are appropriate for this desert context, using bright colors, for example, renewable energy, passive heating and cooling. So if we're going to implement these guidelines, 1, 2, 3, 4, that we just talked about, the urban, the envelope, and such, we want to show you an example of someone who's designed using these design guidelines to show you how successful it is. So this designed group of students each student came up with a different project, and they placed them on the vacant plots. We have a school, a community center, clinic, housing, and a marketplace, which is a souk. And the reason why they selected these different building types is were based on the needs of the villagers. So that's one form of customization. So we're only going to look at one sample project, which is the marketplace, and we can see that this student used the same architectural language they studied the urban morphology, and they carried the morphology forward. They studied at the architectural level the motifs and the building materials, and they carried that forward. The desire for green, the desire for a spiritual sense, outdoor spaces, connection to nature, and they carried that forward. So that's one way. Additionally, a lot of the landmarks in the village, such as prison towers and such, have been carried forward. Sheds and existing features of the village have been carried forward into the design to customize it specifically for this area, and based on the social studies that have been conducted, have been carried forward. Like in addition, urban spaces like narrow corridors and large open spaces have been carried forward. Here are some close-ups of some green roofs. Introducing new elements at the same time to attract people to come to the village is very important. Skylights, skywalks, green roofs. All, however, are low-rise buildings so that they're not invasive. Introducing cafes and such for the village. And that was an example of a project who carried the previously mentioned design guidelines forward to customize their design for this context. And we recommend that all architects that are going to design a project in a particular context should respect the needs of that context, and should implement these design guidelines, ones that respect the climate, the people, their needs, their traditions, into their architectural design. And thank you.